I've celebrated plenty of birthdays, but that night carried a weight of its own. Not because I was hitting some landmark age, or because the restaurant was upscale, though it was. What mattered was the hope I'd been clinging to, that this birthday might feel steady, ordinary, even safe. The past few months with Sarah had been rough. We'd been married almost 10 years, and I thought we'd already weathered the storms that could break us. I remember the glow of amber lights casting warmth over the table, the sharp clink of glasses drifting from the bar, and the faint mix of rosemary and charred steak weaving through the air. Friends and family surrounded us, voices softened by wine and idle chatter. Sarah looked stunning, as she always did, her green dress making her eyes shimmer brighter than usual. But almost as soon as we sat down, her hand went for her phone. At first, I thought it was a quick reply. Then it happened again. And again. Each time, she slipped it beneath the table, angling the screen toward her lap. She'd glance up with a thin smile, then retreat back down, lost in whatever glow the screen gave her. It was subtle, too subtle for anyone else, maybe. But I'd lived beside this woman long enough to know her tells. The tiny curl of her lips when something amused her. The quick flick of her thumb racing across the keyboard like she couldn't type fast enough. That wasn't her sister. That wasn't work. Whoever was on the other end of those messages was making her feel something that had no place at my birthday table. I lifted my wine slowly, watching her over the rim of my glass. My mind wandered back to the recent shifts. The sudden trips to the gym. The way she laughed harder at her phone than at me. The silence that seeped into our talks like water through a crack. I tried to excuse it, told myself it was pressure, or maybe just one of those quieter stretches in marriage that eventually smooth out. But then her phone buzzed again. Third time in minutes. I couldn't fool myself anymore. No one else at the table seemed to notice. Or maybe they did, and chose silence. The waiter appeared with a bottle I'd been saving for years. As the cork popped, I realized I had a decision. Keep swallowing my suspicion, or say it out loud. The air between us felt thick enough to strangle. And then the words shaped themselves in my mind, simple, sharp, like they'd been waiting for their moment. I raised my glass, looked her square in the eyes and said, "To the man who's been keeping my wife entertained." A few guests laughed nervously, mistaking it for a joke. Sarah froze mid-sip. Her eyes went wide, then narrowed into something colder. She tried to laugh it off, play it as if I'd been teasing, but my tone gave me away. She knew I wasn't guessing. And I caught it, the flicker on her face. Not guilt. Fear. The table shifted awkwardly. Conversations faltered and limped back in hushed tones. My best friend, Mark, gave me a searching look. My mother lowered her gaze to her plate. Sarah didn't reach for me, didn't try to explain, didn't even bother to put the phone down. She just kept eating, like pretending might erase what I'd said. But I couldn't unsee it anymore. The secret she held in her lap. The way her attention had drifted somewhere I couldn't follow. I didn't know who he was yet, but I knew he existed. And with that came a cold, steady realization. This would be the last birthday where we pretended our marriage was whole. I smiled through the rest of the dinner, forcing laughs, raising glasses. Inside, I was already shifting gears. I'd been betrayed before, not by her, but in other ways, and I'd learned the value of patience. You don't confront betrayal in fire. You dismantle it piece by piece until the truth is too heavy to deny. Sarah had no idea, but in that moment, I'd started the countdown. And when it reached 0, nothing she thought she owned would be the same. Life after that night looked unchanged from the outside. We still shared a bed. We still asked polite questions about each other's days. We still played the roles. But in my head, the switch had flipped. I stopped trying to repair something invisible. Instead, I began searching. The first rule was restraint. No accusations. No reckless moves. If you call someone out without evidence, they bury their tracks, and you're left chasing smoke. So I kept my mask on. A week later, I bought a separate phone under a different account. Nothing special, just discreet. I opened a small bank account at a branch across town, one that wouldn't appear on our joint statements. Then I began paying attention in silence. It's shocking how much someone reveals without realizing. One evening, she dozed off on the couch with the TV murmuring low. Her phone lay glowing on the coffee table, screen unlocked. I never picked up her phone. I didn't need to. The preview alone told me enough. Wish you were here instead. The number wasn't saved. No name, just digits. That choice alone told me everything. If she had nothing to hide, it would have been stored under a name. After that, the puzzle started fitting itself together. Thursday nights at book club. Errands that dragged on far longer than they should. Extra time at the mirror before supposedly grabbing groceries. Answering calls only after stepping out of the room. I began recording the patterns. What time she left. Which outfit she picked. Whether she drove her car or mine. She stopped wearing the necklace she always chose when we went out together, but I noticed it back on her when she went to see the girls. Small things on their own. But together, they formed something rotten. One Thursday, I decided to follow. Careful, distant, just enough to watch without tipping her off. She pulled into the garage of a downtown hotel I'd never seen her visit. She stayed a little over 2 hours. When she came back, her hair was looser, and her lipstick wasn't the same shade she'd left with. When she walked into the house, I didn't confront her. I brewed coffee, asked how her book club went, and listened to her lie through a practiced smile. That night, I made a call. An old business contact, someone who worked quietly, a private investigator. I gave him her schedule, the hotel's address, and a time frame. I wasn't looking for rumors or speculation. I wanted evidence that could hold up in a courtroom. Meanwhile, I started shifting the ground beneath her feet. I rerouted some of our savings into accounts she didn't know about. Diverted earnings away from our joint funds. Adjusted the paperwork for my business so fewer documents landed in our mailbox. Outwardly, I was the same husband as before. Attentive, present. In reality, I was building walls she'd never see until it was too late. 2 weeks later, the investigator called. His voice calm, almost routine. The report wasn't. Photos. Videos. Receipts. A name. The man wasn't a stranger. I'd met him once at her office holiday party. He'd shaken my hand with a grin that lingered too long, carried too much confidence for someone I barely knew. I'd brushed it off back then as arrogance. Now I understood. It wasn't confidence. It was possession, or at least the illusion of it. I thanked the PI, hung up, and sat in the dark. No more questions. No more excuses. I could have blown it apart that night. Screamed, demanded answers, slammed doors. But I didn't. Because what I wanted wasn't just confession. I wanted the moment she realized I had known all along. That moment was coming. The timing wasn't random. Sarah was hosting a small dinner at our place. Just a handful of friends, a bottle or two of wine. She thought it was safe, the kind of night where I'd keep pretending. What she didn't know was that I had already spoken with my lawyer earlier that week. The papers were signed and ready. The investigator's file sat tucked away in my study drawer. Photos, timestamps, receipts. Unshakable proof. My financial safeguards were complete. When she walked out, she'd be carrying far less than she believed. Guests began arriving around 7. The house filled with chatter and the smell of roasted lamb spilling out of the kitchen. Sarah glowed in her green dress again, the same one that made her eyes seem brighter. For a second, I almost felt the echo of the woman I'd fallen for. Then her phone lit up on the counter, and the name I now knew by heart flashed across the screen. Dinner started smoothly, too smoothly. Conversation skimmed over harmless topics. Sarah slid her phone into her lap, thumb moving quickly under the table, lips curving at messages she couldn't ignore. Nobody else noticed. But I did. Halfway through the meal, I filled everyone's glasses. My pulse didn't race. My chest was steady. I had trained myself for this. I lifted my glass, smiling just enough to keep the mood from collapsing too fast. Someone started a toast, but I cut in. To the man who's been keeping my wife busy. The room froze. A nervous laugh slipped out from one guest, but it died the second they saw my face. Sarah's hand went rigid around her glass. She didn't ask what man. She just looked at me, a faint flush crawling into her cheeks. That silence was louder than any admission. 3 seconds stretched into forever. Mark shifted uncomfortably. Someone cleared their throat. Sarah set her glass down, her voice sharp. That's not funny. I kept my eyes locked on hers. It's not a joke. Her lips parted, then closed. A buzz rattled the phone in her lap, loud in the quiet. She didn't dare touch it. I know, Sarah, I said evenly. I know where you go on Thursdays. I know who he is. I know how long it's been. She started to speak, but I cut her path off. I reached into my jacket, slid a sealed envelope onto the table. Everything's in there. Photos, receipts, messages. A couple of guests shifted uneasily. Mark stared down at his plate. Sarah didn't reach for the envelope. Her eyes flicked between me and the others, weighing which version of the story she might try to spin. I didn't give her the chance. One more thing, I added, my tone calm, almost casual. This is the last dinner we host together. The papers are already filed. The accounts are separate. And the house. It's not in your name anymore. For a moment, her eyes widened before she masked it. I pushed my chair back, lifted my glass one final time, and said, "Enjoy your evening." Then I walked out. I didn't hear her call after me. Maybe she didn't. Outside, the air was cool, still. I took a breath and felt something I hadn't in months. Not revenge. Not triumph. Just control. The quiet relief that comes when you step out of someone else's lie. And I knew as I left my own house behind, she was sitting at that table, replaying every detail of the past few months, realizing the truth. I hadn't stumbled on her secret. I had been watching, waiting, the entire time.